Hey everyone, it's Andrew here, and in this video I want to show you guys how to make a pretty simple interface resembling like Slack using Vue and Tailwind CSS. And so as you can see, we just have a pretty simple messaging interface and along with this sidebar. And so this is not interactive, but I plan to make this part of a bigger series where we end up making like a full stack application with both Vue and Django. And so in this part, we're just focusing on the interface, but we'll definitely be making this more fleshed out in the future parts. So definitely stay tuned and make sure you like and subscribe to be notified when the next parts of the series come out. So jumping right into it, I've already set up my Vue project. As you can see, I use the Vue CLI to create a new project, and I'm not going to walk through that entire process just because, again, I'm trying not to make this like too focused on the beginner setup stuff. So just generally the configurations I have are like, I have Vue router, I use Vuex, Babel, TypeScript, I'm using ESLint with the Airbnb config, and I am not using any CSS preprocessor. That one's significant because it can mess with the Tailwind CSS. And then otherwise, I just added Tailwind CSS. You can use a really simple command of Vue add Tailwind, and so it'll like take care of adding all the stuff you need. Other than that, I've installed Pug in the Pug Plane processor. So where is that? Or Pug Plane loader, and this just lets me use Pug in my HTML. And you'll see in a bit, I think it makes the HTML much more readable. Finally, I also installed Vue Feather Icons. Vue Feather Icons and its TypeScript package. They just have some nice icons that I'm going to be using later. So let's get right into it then. So I'm going to start off in chat.vue, and this is just basically home.vue that they had in the boilerplate. I kind of modified the routing a little bit to just point to this chat.vue at the root level, and I'm just going to be working off of this for now. And obviously we're going to like refactor down the road, but this will be our home base for now. So let me just go ahead and put Pug into this, and then we can get rid of all this and do it like this. So this is our basis. Okay, so first we're going to create the div that will encapsulate everything. And for that, we're going to use, a full height, full width div. And we're going to use make it flex and have overflow hidden. This is important so that the inner divs can kind of scroll independently without the entire page scrolling. And we'll talk about that more later. And then also, we'll use anti-alias just because that will help with some of the font smoothing. And then, so let's talk about what we're going to go through. We're going to make a sidebar, and we're going to make kind of the conversation interface. And then beyond that, inside the conversation interface, we're going to have the conversation header, which is kind of like, like when you're in a channel, at the top, it'll show you the name of the channel, as well as sometimes some other metadata. We're going to not have all that metadata, but we're going to at least make this header to be there. Then we're obviously going to need a messages container. This is kind of this is going to house all the messages, and it's going to be the part that's scrolling, where you can scroll up and down to see many messages. And then inside that, we're going to want to have a single message, and then adjacent to the container and the header is the box to where you send a message. You type your message and send. Since that part's not going to scroll, right? So it's going to have to be external to the messages container. Okay, awesome. Now let's just start working on the sidebar. First, I'm going to put all the code into this view, and then later I'm going to refactor a bit by splitting it out into individual components. So starting with the sidebar, let's start with, div. We want to give it a background. I'm going to use teal just because I like this color. It's kind of pretty. I don't want it to be flex because there's going to be some custom like spacings I need between all the sections in the sidebar. And then we're going to go with a width, a pretty hefty width so that we have some space to work with, and obviously height full. Then we're going to do that top part with the workspace name. So let's give it a div first. And we're going to pretty much want to give some padding, and the header, let's give it a semi-bold for now. And okay, so that'll be our sample workspace name. Below that, we want to give it a that line to separate it. So I'm going to go with some padding and give it a color. So let's give it a border gray 300. And okay, so now that we have that, let's run it real quick. Okay, and then we see that we have this, and that looks pretty good for now. Beyond that, we want to do the rest of the sidebar, and so we're going to have the 2 sections with the channels and then direct messages that list each of those. First, we're going to want to create just a div to separate this section. So we're going to work on the channel section first. This is kind of like channel section, and then we're going to give it a section header, and let's give it let's make this a div with some padding and margin, and then we're going to want to give it a white text. So we want this to be flex and justify between item center, and then we're going to add a cursor pointer. Then we're going to add the part below it, and so we want to give it div, and again flex, and with the items centered. And this time we're going to do justify start, because this is going to be on the left side with channels and then the arrow drop down. So you can see we'll have this icon, and this is an icon from view feather icon, so I'm going to import it. I'm going to have to import it from there in a second, but let's just finish this out first with this is going to be the actual text for channels. And forgot to register it. And there we go. Okay. And then on the right side, we're going to want this plus circle icon, which is also from this. So we're going to import it, register the component, and so the flex makes this div go to the left, and then the circle to the right. Okay, so now we want to add some reactivity, and we're going to add a click handler here. And we're going to toggle the dropdown, and then here we're going to make a member variable called show channels. And we're going to make this function toggle channels dropdown. And basically, it's going to just toggle this variable. So now that we have this variable, we can use this to kind of make several parts reactive. First, we want to make the icon different based on whether we're showing the channels or not. And so we're going to add this chevron down icon, just so that like when you click it to open the dropdown, the arrow will point down or up based on that. And we're going to add like the section body here, and we're going to use that this boolean to do a VIF as well to toggle it, but let's just see what this looks like first. And now it looks like this. Okay, perfect. So for the section body, we said that we want it to be conditionally rendered as well, so we're going to make this toggle based on the VIF, right? And then we make the div for each individual channel. So first I'm going to always add some horizontal padding. I'm going to give it a padding on the bottom, and then like an extra padding on the left beyond 4, just because to give it like a bit of an indent. Now I'm going to do like a text to white, and then again cursor pointer, because eventually these are going to be buttons. And I'm going to just iterate these 10 times just for visual effect. Obviously we're going to make this, we're going to refactor this once we have the actual data and actual messages to work with. So I'm going to make a little square here with the pound sign in it, and that's just usually on the left of every channel. and then we'll make the part with the actual name. Okay, and let's see how this looks. Okay, so yep, that works perfectly. And now I'm going to just copy and paste this for the direct messages section. And so every time you copy paste code, you should probably be wondering, like, is there a way to abstract this? And so here the answer is yes, right? Like, later I'm probably going to want to extract these into like some type of its own component. But for now, and that way we can reuse it between each section. But for now, since I'm just trying to show all the code right now, I'm not going to do that. And so we're going to change these a bit. Instead of toggle channels, we're going to do toggle direct messages, and then show DMs. And show DMs. And we're going to make this message or and yep. So let's add those variables. Show DMs, again false. And so as you can see, this logic is all very like similar, or I mean exactly the same. So it would be really easy to abstract this into a reusable component. And this part, so it's going to be different. Instead of the pound sign, we want it to show a like green dot, right, if they're like active or not. And so to do that, we'll just remake this part, give it a background green, and then we want to do, if you do rounded full, that will make it a fully circle. And then let's give it also a width and a height of 2, make it square, block, just to make it display block so that it will actually render. Okay. So I think we need to somehow like kind of align them and orient them correctly. So let's do, flex is always a great option for that. And let's just see if flex, okay, perfect. So see how that aligns them now, and great. So this part is pretty much done. Now let's move on to the conversation part. So starting off, we want to make the div for the right side and for the entire right side of the conversation. And as we see, there's like 3 elements here, and we're going to want them to be stacked vertically, right? The conversation header at the top, message container in the middle, and then message box at the bottom. So we're going to use a flex box again, but this time flex call, which just makes it, flex in the vertical direction instead of horizontal. And then make the background white and overflow hidden again, for the same reason as before. And so let's make a, we'll save the conversation header for later. Let's first make the messaging container. And, okay. So I'm going to make this part have a bit of a padding, and on the bottom as well. I'm going to use flex again, and overflow Y is scroll, right? This is the most important part because we want to scroll our messages. So now let's get some messages in there. So first of all, let's do div for the message and just give it a basic horizontal padding. I'm going to, again, iterate this 50 times just so we can actually get a scroll going. And then, so this, I want to kind of orient the items all towards the left, which is why we do item start. And let's do text small. Give each one a margin on the bottom. And, okay, so we're going to use the profile picture first. That's going to be the first item, flex item. Give it, a square size, slightly rounded. And the source, we can just pull from a website that I like. called picsum.photos. And you can just grab like a random stock image, and it's a good size too. So now that we have that, we're going to want an item, like we have the photo on the left side, and then to the right of it, we're going to have 2 rows of text, right? The name and then timestamp, and then the actual message body text. So we'll start with flex again. That's always a good starting point. And then let's make one div for the top row text. So we have the sender name. And this is going to be the timestamp, and we want it to be a bit smaller and, kind of gray so that it's differentiated. And give it a margin on the left side. And let's just say 12:50 p.m. for now. Oops. And then below that, on a separate row, right, because it's a div is going to push to new line, we're going to have the message body text. Okay, so, yep, let's see how that looks. Okay, wonderful. So, yep, we have the scroll going on. And so the reason why the overflow hidden was really important is if we didn't have that, like this entire page would scroll, and so that looks good. And now let's make the conversation header as well as the sending message box. So the conversation header, I'm going to give it a border bottom because that's what it looks like in the Slack example, and give it some padding as usual. And here we're just going to make, 2 rows of text. For one, we're going to make the header, which is the channel name. And then also we're going to, I think some channels have a description. I think obviously if you have a direct message, this might not apply. And so we can kind of refactor this later. But I'm just going to put this here so that we have this space for that. As you can see, this part is going to not scroll, so that's good. And yeah, in the real Slack, there's extra metadata, on the side. You can get this detail pane on the right side, but we're going to take care of that in later parts. Now for the last part, sending the message send box. Okay, so let's start with an outer div just to give it some padding and margins. And then on the inside, this is going to be what's shaping the box. And we're going to give it, borders and make it rounded and such. And let's just do overflow hidden just in case. And then we're going to put the input inside. And we're going to give it a padding on the bottom that's different from the padding on the top, just because when you look at a text box, you don't really want it to be centered vertically. You want it to be like, it's supposed to go top down, right? So we're going to give it less padding on the top. Type equals text. And let's just give it a placeholder message. So as you can see, there's the border of our box, and it's just the rounded corners, and this works pretty well. This could probably be less because there's just a lot of white space at the bottom. That's almost it. The last part that we're going to add is the hover effect on the message, where when you hover it, you can see some action items on top of it. To do the last part for the message, we need to separate everything into separate components first. So I'm just going to do that really quick. Okay, so now that we've separated everything into separate components, to create this reactive element of our single message, we're going to do several things. First, we're going to add the relative to this outer div. This is going to help us to use absolute positioning for the buttons when we hover. And we're going to add some listeners for mouse over. And we're going to do mouse over and mouse leave. And these are just going to toggle a variable. And we're going to create this variable in here. So this is why it's useful to have separate components so that every message can have its own data that dictates whether it's hovered or not. And then we're going to add a conditional class. And this is just a view feature where you can do some classes that are conditionally rendered based on a Boolean value. And we're just going to use isHovered for our Boolean value. And this should mean that every time it's hovered, this class is going to be applied. So actually this looks a bit dark. Let's do just 100 for now. And then we're going to add our button here. But we're going to make a component for that. Let's just make sure the hovering effect works first. And we're going to add our action buttons here later, but first let's just make sure that our hover effect works. So as you can see, as we hover it, it turns the background gray over there. So now let's add our buttons. We'll make a separate component first, and then in this component, and we'll just take out this boilerplate and get started. So for this div, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make a scoped CSS. I want to take this chance to demonstrate some parts of the Tailwind CSS, and that is the apply directive. So with Tailwind CSS, you can use apply to apply classes kind of like I'm doing right now within a different class. So the absolute positioning and background white will get applied to any element where I use this class. And it's really useful to kind of quickly apply different CSS classes. This error is kind of just a VS Code thing. It would prefer you to do it like this, but and so we can do that. That's fine. For this, since this is absolute positioning, I'm going to apply this to the outermost div. So since we're using absolute positioning, you can what that means is you define the position used in absolute terms, in pixel terms. So that's also the reason why we used relative positioning for the div above this right here. It's relative so that we can position this div absolutely, but still relative to the parent div. So we want it to be negative 16 pixels. So that means 16 pixels above the top of the parent div, and then 27 pixels coming from the right of the div. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So this outermost div is just going to help with the placement. Then I want to do an action button container, and this is where we're actually going to put all the shape. We're going to give it some shape here. So to do that, we're going to make it flex. I'm going to do rounded, and let's do a large amount of rounding, and we're going to give it gray border, but that means we also need to apply border so that it's visible, and I'll give it some custom padding. So let's see if we can get this to show first. And then I'm going to import this component and put it here. and conditionally render it based on the hover. So you see there's something there. We have the border. It's really small because we don't have anything inside of it right now to give it some shape and size. And so we're going to need to give it some buttons. And to do that, what we are going to do is define 3 different divs for 3 buttons. And so we're going to use one CSS class to so we can have more reusability. And inside each one, we're going to put an icon. But let's just style these buttons real quick first. So what we want to do for the button is give it, dot action button. We want to give each one a, like a square shape. So I'm going to apply height and width. And then, again, we want to make it rounded, have rounded borders. And let's make it flex, just so we can center the icon on the inside, both vertically and horizontally, makes that easier. And since these are going to be buttons, we're going to make them cursor pointer. And actually, I'm just going to use a small amount of flex. So this should already give some shape. Okay. Oh, whoops, I put it on the flex. I meant to put this on rounded. I got confused. Okay. Okay. Well, we don't see our width and height yet, but that's okay. Let's just keep going, and so I want it to have a background when it's hovered, and that will do that. And we need to do one more class. This is for the icons inside of the button, and we're going to put these here. So the 3 icons that we're going to use, we're going to have a smile icon. Actually, yeah. And then we're going to have the edit icon. And then we're going to do the trash can icon. And we'll import all of these, again, from view feather icons. And then we just need to register them. Okay, and now you can see they show up here. Although something is not quite right with our outer div. Oh, because I called it action button instead of BTN. So that's why I wasn't seeing it. I was kind of confused. Anyways, so now you can see... Okay, so now that it's applied, it's actually like shaping up that div. Yeah, I was confused why it wasn't showing up earlier. But so if we comment out the icons, it should still show. Yeah, you can see these divs are taking up the space, and so it pushes out the outer div. But we want these icons there, so yep. And the last thing we can do is I might I think it was text red. Yeah. So you might add like a red color for the trash can icon. That's about it. Yeah. And so now that's basically our fundamental interface, and we're going to be building off of this in the future parts. I think the next part will make this interactive on the front end side. So not setting up the backend server yet, but just making this kind of being able to, press enter and have the message show up, being able to kind of switch conversations maybe. But it's all going to use kind of sample dummy data, mocked data, API data. We won't set up a real API yet, but we'll add some more interface elements and interactivity, like deleting, editing, maybe even adding reactions, although that might be a different story. And so thanks for watching, and be sure to stay tuned, like and subscribe to be notified when the next parts of this series come out. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.